Every great scientific breakthrough starts with a bold hypothesis. The hypothesis for these 10 innovators was simple. I am smarter than the fundamental laws of the universe. As a quick disclaimer for our lawyers and your own future, do not attempt to replicate these experiments under any circumstances. Their results were conclusive. 1. Our scientific journey begins in a dimly lit Ohio garage, a place that smelled less of innovation and more of shattered dreams and the faint aroma of stale beer. This was the sacred laboratory of one Kevin, a 28-year-old whose entire nuclear physics education came from a dangerous cocktail of video game lore and the kind of YouTube tutorials that begin with, legal disclaimer, do not try this at home. Kevin wasn't just a man with a hobby. He was a man on a holy mission to recreate Nuka-Cola Quantum, the iconic glowing beverage from the game Fallout. While a sane person recognizes this as a charming piece of fiction, Kevin saw it as a product waiting for a genius to bring it to market. His plan was simple. Get some radioactive material, mix it with something fluorescent, and become the undisputed king of every party for the rest of his life. Pro tip: when your life plan involves willingly drinking radioactive material, the rest of your life can be measured in hours, not years. Kevin's research led him to tritium, a radioactive isotope of hydrogen used to make things like glowing exit signs and watch dials. His grand logical leap was a thing of beauty. If it's safe enough to be near your wrist for years, it must be safe enough to be in your stomach for a few minutes. This is the kind of flawless reasoning that gets you a starring role on this channel. Now, for the quick science lesson Kevin clearly treated like a pop-up ad. Radiation is a lot like a bonfire. Standing near it, you feel the heat, but you can walk away. Swallowing it, however, is like eating the burning coals. The danger is no longer over there. It's having a cellular-level rave party inside your digestive tract, shredding your DNA from the inside out with an intimacy you never asked for. But Kevin treated this information like it was the terms and conditions on a software update. He scrolled right past it, clicked agree, and moved on. He gathered his friends, who served as a loyal film crew for his own demise, and began the final act of his atomic theater. He mixed the tritium into a solution with some tonic water, creating a mesmerizing, beautiful blue glow. It was genuinely hypnotic. It was also a beaker full of concentrated, weaponized death. Holding it aloft, he gave a speech about democratizing the atom for recreational use, a phrase that should have immediately put him on a government watch list. He toasted his friends, who were all raising their perfectly safe domestic beers, declared to science, and took a long, proud, life-altering swig. For about 3 seconds, he was a god, a man who had bent the universe to his will. Then, the bonfire in his gut roared to life. His body began a frantic, losing battle as trillions of beta particles acted like microscopic bullets, tearing through the soft tissues of his internal organs. The paramedics who arrived later were utterly baffled by the 911 call. They found a man complaining of the worst indigestion in human history, who also happened to be faintly glowing in the dark like a forgotten Halloween decoration. In the end, Kevin did become a legend. He's a footnote in medical textbooks on acute internal radiation poisoning, a cautionary tale for the ages. He successfully created a drink that was literally to die for, proving once and for all that while you can get a degree from the University of YouTube, the final exams are an absolute killer. 2. In the quiet, leafy suburbs of Portland, Oregon, a war was being waged. It wasn't a war of armies, but a war of acoustics, a deeply personal feud between Gary, a 45-year-old amateur engineer, and his neighbor's teenage son's car stereo. For months, Gary's life was a seismic event, a constant barrage of bass so powerful it made his dental fillings hum and his spoons dance in the kitchen drawer. He complained. He called the cops. Nothing worked. So Gary, a man who believed watching a 10-minute tutorial made him an expert in any field, decided to escalate. He wasn't going to bring a knife to a gunfight. He was going to bring a tactical acoustic nuke to a noise complaint. He became obsessed with resonant frequency, the scientific principle that if you hit an object with just the right sound wave, it will shake itself to pieces. Think an opera singer shattering a wine glass, but on a suburban sociopathic scale. His plan was a masterpiece of petty genius. He would build a sonic cannon, tune it to the resonant frequency of his neighbor's house, and literally vibrate the walls into dust. He spent weeks in his garage, a fortress of solitude and spite, constructing a monstrous subwoofer horn powered by a bank of amplifiers that could dim the lights of the entire block. Now, here's the critical science part. Different materials vibrate at different frequencies. Gary's calculations, which he probably did on a napkin, were all aimed at finding the perfect pitch to liquefy drywall and shatter windows. What he never ever considered in all his research was that the human body also has resonant frequencies. Specifically, the squishy, delicate organs inside your chest cavity are just waiting for the right vibration to turn into jelly. The day of reckoning came. The neighbor's bass was thumping with particular vigor. Gary, with the grim satisfaction of a Bond villain about to press the big red button, donned a pair of industrial-grade headphones, a detail that is just dripping with tragic irony, and flipped the master switch. A deep, silent pulse of energy, a sound so low it was felt rather than heard, shot from his device. He stared at his neighbor's house, waiting for it to crumble. But the house stood firm. What Gary felt, however, was a strange tickle in his chest, a deep, internal hum. He had made a catastrophic rounding error. His weapon, instead of targeting brick and mortar, had found the perfect frequency to resonate with his own lungs. The delicate alveolar sacs began to vibrate like a hummingbird's wings, tearing themselves apart at a microscopic level. He collapsed, not from a heart attack, but from a massive pulmonary hemorrhage, drowning from the inside as his own invention shook him apart with cold, indifferent physics. The police found him in his soundproofed garage, a silent victim of a perfectly executed, horribly mistargeted scientific revenge. The neighbor's kid never even noticed, just turning the bass up another notch to get a better vibe. 3. Meet Alex, a 26-year-old biohacker from San Francisco, a man who believed that millions of years of evolution was just a lazy first draft waiting for a genius like him to provide the final edits. His grand project? To render scuba gear obsolete by teaching himself to breathe water. In his mind, the human body was just buggy hardware, and he was the Silicon Valley prodigy about to release the 2.0 patch that would turn humanity into an amphibious species. He didn't have a multi-million-dollar lab, but he did have a cramped apartment bathroom, a webcam for his livestream, and a level of self-confidence that could deflect asteroids. His entire theory was based on a dangerously flawed interpretation of high school chemistry. He saw water, H2O, as inefficient. But hydrogen peroxide, H2O2, he proudly called it Water Plus, a premium version with a bonus oxygen atom just waiting to be absorbed. His plan was breathtakingly simple and catastrophically stupid. Fill his tub with a concentrated peroxide solution, dunk his head in, and let his lungs simply soak up the extra O2. He was going to give himself gills using stuff you buy at the pharmacy to bleach your hair. Now, a quick reality check for anyone thinking of upgrading their own biology. Hydrogen peroxide is an oxidizer. That's a fancy word for bleach. It's what scientists use to sterilize equipment by chemically obliterating all organic life on contact. Trying to breathe it for its oxygen is like trying to hydrate yourself by drinking a gallon of fire. But Alex, a man who saw warning labels as mere suggestions from a society that couldn't comprehend his vision, was undeterred. He set up his webcam to document his glorious ascension to a new state of being. He poured bottle after bottle of industrial-strength peroxide into his tub, creating a fizzing, bubbling jacuzzi of death he proudly called his aqueous respiration matrix. He put on swim goggles, because safety first, obviously, and delivered a stirring speech to his online audience about breaking the chains of our terrestrial biology. Then, he went for it. He submerged his head and, with the faith of a true believer, took a deep, hearty gulp of his upgraded water. The result was not a feeling of aquatic freedom. It was an instant, violent, and absolute rejection by every cell in his body. His lungs, an organ delicately designed exclusively for gas exchange, received a blast of chemical warfare instead. The delicate tissues were flash-cooked, chemically sandblasted into oblivion. His attempt to install a biological upgrade resulted in a fatal system error, a blue screen of death from which there is no reboot. The webcam faithfully recorded it all, capturing the moment a self-proclaimed visionary proved he was really just a man who found a very complicated and painful way to drink bleach in his own bathtub. 4. Let's venture now into a Wisconsin garage, a sacred space where ambition and a profound misunderstanding of high school physics come together to create tragedy. Our protagonist is Mark, a budding YouTube personality who believed that building your own equipment wasn't just cheaper, it was a sign of superior intellect. His grand project was to demonstrate the power of a vacuum by making a marshmallow expand. A simple, safe experiment. But Mark believed in spectacle. He decided that a small acrylic chamber was for children. He, a man of science, would build a man-sized vacuum chamber. His material of choice? Plywood. Let's pause for a science lesson Mark obviously skipped. The air around us is not empty. It's a thick, heavy blanket pressing down on everything with about 14.7 pounds of force per square inch. You don't feel it because the air inside you is pushing out with equal pressure. It's a perfect, life-sustaining stalemate. When you remove the air from inside a sealed box, that stalemate is over. The atmosphere on the outside launches an all-out assault, trying to crush the box with the force of a full-grown elephant. This is why vacuum chambers are made of thick, forged steel, not something you'd use to build a wobbly bookshelf. Mark, however, saw this as a minor detail. He constructed his plywood box, reinforcing the corners with flimsy brackets and sealing the seams with a comical amount of wood glue. For the grand finale of his hubris, he decided to sit on top of the box while filming, to provide his viewers with a dynamic, top-down angle. He flipped the switch on a powerful vacuum pump. For about 3 seconds, the universe played along. The marshmallow inside the box began to swell magnificently. Mark grinned, a triumphant god looking down on his creation. And then physics decided it had seen enough. There was a deep, guttural groan of tortured wood, and then a sound that wasn't an explosion, but its terrifying opposite, a violent, instantaneous implosion. The 20,000 pounds of atmospheric pressure that had been patiently waiting outside slammed down, and the plywood box didn't just break, it was annihilated. It became a cloud of splinters in less than a blink of an eye. And because Mark was sitting on it, he wasn't just a spectator, he was the payload. The same force that crushed the box also crushed him, turning him and his experiment into a single, compressed pile of organic matter and wood pulp. The footage from his camera was a masterpiece of unintentional dark comedy. A smile, a puffing marshmallow, and then an immediate violent cut to static. He had successfully demonstrated the awesome power of a vacuum, just using his own body as the final, and most convincing, piece of evidence. 5. Our next tale takes us to the blistering Arizona desert, a place where the sun isn't just a gentle life-giver. It's a celestial bully looking for a victim. And in the summer of 2015, one man decided to harness that bully for the dumbest reason imaginable. Meet Dave, a retired accountant who, in his infinite boredom, had become obsessed with crazy science videos on the internet. After seeing a teenager melt a penny with a large Fresnel lens, Dave scoffed. Quaint, child's play. He was a man who believed that if something was worth doing, it was worth overdoing to a point of sheer apocalyptic stupidity. His goal? To build a solar death ray, not to melt a coin, but to instantly cook a hot dog for a viral video he would title BBQ at the Speed of Light. It was a project that perfectly combined his love for spectacle with his complete disregard for the laws of thermodynamics. Let's be clear about the science he ignored. A small magnifying glass creates a hot spot. It's a cute trick for frying ants. What Dave built was a 5-foot satellite dish he salvaged from a junkyard, which he meticulously covered with over 500 perfectly angled, highly reflective mirrors, all aimed at a single, terrifying focal point. This doesn't create a hot spot. It creates a localized, man-made piece of the sun's surface. It's a silent, invisible beam of pure thermal energy capable of reaching 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature that makes solid steel look like soft-serve ice cream. He spent a month in his sun-scorched backyard, turning it into a monument to his own impending doom. On the big day, he set up his camera on a tripod, donned a pair of cheap mirrored sunglasses as his only safety equipment, and mounted a single, unsuspecting hot dog in a metal vise at the predetermined focal point. He delivered a grand speech to his future viewers about harnessing the very power of a star for our culinary needs, a sentence that should have caused the universe to revoke his license to exist. He checked the alignment. A pathetic wisp of smoke curled from the hot dog. It wasn't the instantaneous, explosive cooking he craved for his viral masterpiece. Annoyed, he muttered to the camera, "The focal point must be off by a fraction of an inch," and took a fateful stroll. He walked between the giant mirror dish and his target to get a better look, momentarily blocking the beam with his own body. He made a tiny adjustment to one mirror, then, fatally, took one small step sideways to admire his work. In that moment, he moved directly into the invisible, silent, and unimaginably powerful focal point. There was no sound. There was no warning. Just a sudden, brilliant, blinding flash as his cotton shirt, his skin, and the first few inches of his torso were instantly vaporized. The death ray was not, as it turns out, a clever clickbait name. It was a literal, brutally honest description of its primary function. He had built a flawless, solar-powered cremation machine. His wife came home a few hours later to find a perfectly cooked hot dog, a camera that had faithfully recorded the moment of ignition, and a pair of melted sunglasses lying in a small, smoldering pile of ash. Dave finally went viral, just not in the way he'd planned. He had become the star, the director, and the unwilling subject of the world's shortest and most effective cooking show. 6. We now visit a sprawling, tetanus-filled junkyard in Pennsylvania, the personal kingdom of Earl, a scrap metal savant and self-taught engineer. Earl was a man who viewed physics not as a set of immutable rules, but as a list of friendly suggestions he could improve upon with more power. His old crane's grappling claw was slow and inefficient, so he decided to build an electromagnet. His entire blueprint for this project was based on Saturday morning cartoons, where magnets are a clean, precise tool that only grabs the one thing you want. He was about to learn that real-world physics is a lot messier and a lot more lethal. The science is simple. Wrap a wire around an iron core, add electricity, and you get a magnet. But Earl's personal philosophy was to take simple and make it apocalyptic. He didn't just wrap a core. He mummified a massive steel axle in what looked like every foot of copper wire in the entire state. He didn't just use a battery. He chained together a dozen high-amp truck batteries in series and connected them to a giant, theatrical knife switch that looked like it belonged in Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory. Now, here's the part where logic packs its bags and moves to another town. A powerful magnetic field is not a laser beam. It doesn't politely grab the one object you're aiming at. It is an indiscriminate, invisible vortex of force that violently yanks on every single piece of ferrous metal within its reach. It's not a precision tool. It's a magnetic black hole with an appetite for destruction. Earl's workshop, a chaotic hellscape of scattered wrenches, loose bolts, sharp metal offcuts, and discarded saw blades, was about to become an arsenal. The moment of truth arrived. He aimed his glorious creation at a rusty V8 engine block. He yelled to his buddy, who was filming from what he mistakenly believed was a safe distance, "Get ready for the magic happening," and slammed the switch down. The electromagnet hummed to life with a terrifying amount of raw, unregulated power. It worked. The engine block shot into the air, clinging to the magnet. But so did everything else. In a single, horrifying instant, his workshop declared war on him. A hammer sitting on a workbench became a silver missile. A can of loose screws became a shotgun blast of metal confetti. A forgotten crowbar leaning against the wall became a deadly javelin. Every piece of junk metal he owned was instantly transformed into a high-velocity projectile, and they all flew towards a single point of convergence, the giant magnet at the end of his crane. And standing proudly right beside it, arms folded, admiring his handiwork, was Earl. He became the epicenter of his own metallic tornado, impaled simultaneously by a dozen of his own tools traveling at bullet-like speeds. He had successfully built the world's most powerful scrap metal collector, But he made the fatal error of being made of soft, squishy stuff that was directly in the collection path. 7. And now, for our next exhibit, we have a beautiful piece of tragic misdirection. It's a story that waves a big, flashy, high-voltage danger sign in your face, all while the real killer, a silent and patient assassin, slips in through the back door. Meet Barry, a motorcycle fanatic from Florida whose personal philosophy was that warning labels were written for other, less capable people. His mission: to chrome plate his own bike parts in his garage. For the uninitiated, this involves dunking metal into a vat of acid and then blasting it with a powerful electrical current. The potential for a spectacular, self-inflicted electrocution is astronomical. Barry set the stage for his demise perfectly. He had a bathtub full of corrosive, conductive acid. He had a power supply cobbled together from an old car battery and a welder, with wires so frayed they looked like they'd lost a fight with a badger. He was working barefoot on a damp concrete floor. The whole scene screamed imminent, sizzling death. As the narrator, I'm practically drooling. We see it coming. The audience sees it coming. We're all just waiting for the moment he slips, touches the wrong thing, and completes the circuit, turning his garage into a disco of his own destruction. And he almost gave us the satisfaction. He fumbled, he splashed, he created a dozen near misses that would make a safety inspector weep. But here's the brilliant, ironic twist. The science that killed Barry wasn't the loud, flashy physics of electricity. It was the quiet, insidious chemistry he didn't even know was happening. While the electricity does the shiny work, the process of electroplating releases a fine, invisible aerosol of hexavalent chromium. This isn't just a chemical, it's one of the most vicious lung toxins known to man. Professional plating shops have ventilation systems that could suck a bowling ball through a keyhole. Barry's garage had a single, wheezing window fan that was probably older than he was. For an entire weekend, he hunched over this bubbling cauldron of doom, breathing deeply, admiring his handiwork, completely unaware that he was lining his lungs with microscopic chemical razor blades. He finished the job without a single electrical shock. He stood back, a proud genius who had wrestled lightning and won. He had stared death in the face and laughed. But the ghost he'd inhaled was already winning the war. A few days later, a cough. Then a shortness of breath. He died a week later from what doctors called fulminant chemical pneumonitis. He wasn't electrocuted. He was dissolved from the inside out by the very air in his own garage. He was taken out not by the dramatic bang everyone was watching, but by the silent, deadly whisper of a science he had failed to even consider. 8. Meet Professor Alastair Finch, a man who viewed the laws of physics not as immutable rules, but as a personal, deeply offensive insult. His lifelong arch-nemesis was the second law of thermodynamics, that pesky universal truth that you always lose energy in a system. A bouncing ball never comes back to its starting height because of things like friction, sound, and heat. The universe, in short, always takes a commission, a little tax called entropy. Alastair found this deeply, philosophically inefficient, and he was determined to create a tax shelter. He spent his entire life, savings and a decade of his life, in a dusty laboratory developing a revolutionary polymer, a bizarre, rubber-like substance he claimed had a near 99.9% energy return. He called it Resilium. He used it to create the soles for a pair of what he grandly dubbed the perpetual motion shoes. He genuinely believed that with these shoes, a single small hop could propel a person for miles with minimal effort, effectively defeating entropy itself. In reality, he had invented a pair of elegant physics-based suicide boots. The day of his grand public unveiling arrived. He stood on his front porch before a small crowd of local reporters, unimpressed neighbors, and a few physics students who were probably there for the free donuts. He gave a smug, condescending speech about ending our reliance on fossil fuels, one bounce at a time. For his first demonstration, he performed a tiny 6-inch hop off the bottom step of his porch. The shoes worked flawlessly. He bounced back up. 5.99 inches. The crowd gave a light, unimpressed applause. So, feeling the pressure, he tried a bigger hop, a 2-foot leap of faith, to really show off the material's potential. He shot back up, landing perfectly. This is where the science began its brutal and hilarious lesson. With each bounce, nearly all the kinetic energy was being conserved and returned. He was trapped in an escalating, violent feedback loop of his own creation. His controlled experiment had devolved into a vertical nightmare. The 2-foot hops became frantic, uncontrollable 6-foot bounces. The 6-foot bounces became terrifying 15-foot caroms off the side of his own roof, leaving little shoe-shaped dents in the siding. The crowd's polite applause had turned to horrified open-mouthed gasps. He was no longer a scientist. He was a human pinball, a screaming, flailing testament to his own genius. He was desperately trying to stop, to fall over, to do anything to break the cycle. But every collision with the ground just reloaded the springs and fueled the next, more violent launch. His final, majestic bounce sent him soaring in a beautiful, silent arc over his white picket fence and directly into the grill of a passing city bus. The police were baffled. The cause of death was obvious, but the physics behind it were so absurd it took a team from the local university to piece it together. Alistair had spent his life trying to break a fundamental law of the universe. In the end, the universe decided to use that very same law to break him, with extreme prejudice. 9. We journey now to the rugged hills of West Virginia, where Jedediah, a backyard engineer and self-certified genius, felt that NASA's astronaut selection process was deeply flawed for consistently overlooking him. So he decided he could build his own space program, starting with the centerpiece, a human centrifuge to test his endurance for high G-forces. A real NASA centrifuge is a multi-million-dollar masterpiece of precision engineering, a perfectly balanced machine designed to simulate acceleration safely and controllably. Jedediah's centrifuge consisted of a rusty lawn chair he found on the side of the road, a 20-foot steel I-beam he borrowed from a construction site, and the rear axle of a jacked-up 1987 pickup truck that was probably older than the concept of gravity. This wasn't an instrument of science. It was an unholy marriage of scrap metal, stolen parts, and catastrophically bad ideas. The scientific principle he was about to tragically demonstrate wasn't G-force tolerance, but catastrophic structural failure. Welds, especially the lumpy, bubblegum-looking kind that Jedediah specialized in, have a finite amount of strength. When you subject them to the relentless, ever-increasing pull of centrifugal force, they don't just break. They surrender with the kind of explosive enthusiasm that gets you a feature on our show. Jedediah strapped himself into the lawn chair with a seatbelt from a '78 Ford Pinto and gave his cousin, who was acting as mission control from the driver's seat, the thumbs up. The truck's engine roared to life. The chair began to spin, faster and faster. Jedediah was a blur, a screaming pioneer on the edge of glory and unconsciousness. The truck's speedometer hit 80 miles per hour, translating to a rotational speed that was putting thousands of pounds of shearing stress on Jedediah's questionable handiwork. At that moment, the primary weld connecting the I-beam to the chair decided it had worked enough for one lifetime and filed for immediate retirement. There was a sharp final metallic crack that was audible even over the screaming engine. The lawn chair and Jedediah were instantly liberated from their circular path. They were no longer part of a centrifuge. They had been transformed into a single, unified projectile. They were launched with the velocity of a cannonball, a silent, screaming tribute to poor craftsmanship and a fundamental misunderstanding of material science. The chair soared across the yard, cleared the neighbors' prize-winning petunias, and made a spectacular, non-consensual entry into their kitchen via the vinyl siding. Jedediah had finally achieved liftoff, but his rapid, unscheduled disassembly proved that his re-entry needed a little more work. He never got to experience the crushing G's of a rocket launch, but he did get to experience the crushing finality of a high-speed encounter with a refrigerator. 10. Our final lesson in failed science takes place at a house party, hosted by a culinary influencer named Chad. Chad believed that cooking wasn't just an art, it was a performance, and he was the main event. To wow his guests, he was going to make instant ice cream using liquid nitrogen. This is a real technique used by high-end professional chefs. Chad, however, had the culinary finesse of a sledgehammer and the scientific knowledge of a garden gnome. The science he was about to ignore is one of the most powerful and fundamental forces in nature. Phase transition. Liquid nitrogen is a liquid only because it's ridiculously cold, sitting at around minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit. At room temperature, it violently and desperately wants to become a gas again. And when it does, it expands to nearly 700 times its original volume. This is not a gentle process. It is an explosive expansion of matter. If you do this in an open bowl, you get theatrical fog and delicious ice cream. If you do this in a sealed container, you are no longer a chef. You are an unlicensed bomb technician, and your kitchen is the blast zone. Chad, in a moment of pure, unadulterated genius, decided an open bowl was too slow and didn't have enough wow factor. He poured his ice cream base, cream, sugar, vanilla, into a large stainless steel thermos. A container specifically designed with a vacuum seal to be airtight. He then poured in a generous amount of liquid nitrogen, creating a beautiful cloud of fog that impressed his friends. But impatient for the results, he made his fatal move. He snapped the airtight lid shut, held it up to his cheering friends, and said, "Now for the magic part. A little shake is all it takes." He gave the thermos one single, vigorous shake. The agitation and the slight warmth of the cream was all the encouragement the liquid nitrogen needed. The pressure inside the thermos went from normal to that of a naval artillery shell in less than a second. The thermos didn't just burst, it detonated. It exploded with the force of a stick of dynamite, turning the high-grade stainless steel into a cloud of razor-sharp shrapnel. The blast wave blew out his kitchen windows and sent his friends diving for cover. The shrapnel, now super chilled to hundreds of degrees below zero, ripped through the drywall, the cabinets, and most tragically and effectively, through Chad himself. He had promised his friends an unforgettable dessert experience, and he delivered. He had successfully created a cryobomb, becoming the main ingredient in his own final, explosive, and very, very cold dessert. All right, final exam. You're forming a survival committee with all 10 of these scientific pioneers. Who do you vote out first to maximize the group's chance of living past lunch, and why? The most logical takedown wins our respect. Debate below, and if you enjoy watching humanity fail its pop quiz with the universe, obliterate those like and subscribe buttons.